That concludes general questions. We turn now to First Minister's questions. Our first question from Jackson Carlo.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister confirmed this week that she wants not just one referendum next year, but two. Now, given she's ignored the result of the last two, why would anyone believe she would behave differently this time round?
First Minister.
Well, I'm rumbled because I want the people of Scotland to be able to escape a Tory Brexit that will damage our economy, damage our society, damage the prospects of future generations. I want Scotland to be able to escape years and years and years of further Tory wrangling on Brexit. And yes, I want the people of Scotland to have the opportunity to choose their own future. And I'll seek to persuade the people of Scotland in that choice to choose independence so that we can build the more prosperous, fairer, more equal Scotland that I believe we are capable of being. And I can't understand why anybody on any of these benches would not want exactly the same thing.
Jackson Carlo.
Interestingly, the one thing the First Minister didn't say there was that she would behave any differently if she lost next time round. And she's always confident she's going to win a referendum. The track record shows she always loses. Yeah. And I'm asking because I'm just not sure the First Minister has thought through her big double referendum promise. As she keeps telling us, she would ask Jeremy Corbyn for a referendum on independence and demand it's held next year. And we know too that she would support Mr Corbyn's plan for a second Brexit referendum, also to be held next year. Yep. Now, First Minister, clarify for me a simple question on timetabling. When is all this supposed to happen? Both referendums on the one day or on different days? Which vote would come first? Indie-ref, Euro-ref, which?
First Minister.
Well, my priority, and I can't believe Jackson Carlo hasn't actually cottoned on to this yet, he should maybe listen a bit more. My priority is to give the people of Scotland the opportunity to choose independence next year, and I look forward to delivering on that. But Jackson Carlo is also mistaken when it comes to past referendums, because he also might conveniently be forgetting this fact. In the 2016 Brexit referendum, I campaigned for Remain. Actually, memory tells me so did Jackson Carlo. And Scotland voted to remain in the EU by 62%. That's the referendum result I want to see honoured. The question for Jackson Carlo is why is he so willing to ignore how people in Scotland voted on that question?
Jackson Carlo.
You heard it from the First Minister there. Her priority used to be education, now it's independence. And I'm not surprised the First Minister can't answer the basic question here, because frankly none of it makes sense. Not only is Nicola Sturgeon going to demand a second independence referendum be held next year, as well as supporting a second Brexit referendum, she's also telling people that she's going to help form what she grandly describes as a progressive alliance with other parties across the UK. That's the same UK, if we follow her rightly, that she hopes to leave weeks later. Now, I'm intrigued. Can the First Minister explain how you can hope to form an alliance with the same people you're planning to walk out on?
First Minister.
I think Jackson Carlo has probably confused himself with that question as well as the rest of the population. But can I say, firstly, Jackson Carlo asked me what my priority was between different referendums, and I made clear to him, and I'll do it again, my priority is to give the people of Scotland the opportunity to choose independence. Secondly, perhaps Jackson Carlo might reflect on this. If referendums are so dreadful, according to him, why did David Cameron, the Tory Prime Minister at the time, foist a Brexit referendum on Scotland? And thirdly, yes, I would want to be part of a progressive alliance to lock Tories out of government in Westminster. Why? Because Tories wreak misery and havoc. It's a year today, Presiding Officer, since Theresa May presented her Brexit deal to her Cabinet, unleashing a year of chaos and division at the hands of the Tories. Welfare cuts, austerity, pushing more and more children into poverty. No right-minded person across this country would want anything other than an alternative to that Tory misery.
Jackson Carlo.
I see we're back to our shouty, megaphone, inclusive speech-making, First Minister. All this is complete nonsense from you, but helpfully, your colleague and close ally, David Linden, last night did clarify matters. Because he revealed even if the UK stayed in the European Union after a second vote, the SNP would come up with yet more reasons for a grievance rematch on independence anyway. So after Indie Ref 2, it would be Indie Ref 3, then Indie Ref 4. Everyone knows we'd be doing the Indie Ref forever. All the grand talk of alliances is just a nationalist game. Unlike some in this chamber, the Scottish Conservatives aren't buying it. We'll stand up for Scotland's lifetime decision to stay in the UK. Isn't the real question here why she and Jeremy Corbyn are refusing to do so?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Scottish Tories have never stood up for Scotland in their puff. And we've seen ample evidence of that over the past 3.5 years since Scotland voted to remain in the European Union, and that vote was ignored and has been ignored every single day by the Conservatives. But I want to put Jackson Carlaw's mind at rest on one thing. I believe Scotland will vote for independence when it comes to Indie Ref 2, so we will not have to worry about any further occasions. But let me be absolutely candid, because I can't believe Jackson Carlaw or anybody else is in any doubt about this. I support independence for Scotland. And yes, I do want Scotland to escape a position where we are having our futures imposed upon us by Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, who is now having his strings pulled by Nigel Farage. The Tory party is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Nigel Farage and the Brexit party. So I don't want that to be Scotland's future. I want the people of Scotland to have the opportunity to choose their own future. I want the people of Scotland to have the opportunity to choose independence so that we can build the kind of Scotland that we know we are capable of becoming.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week, new figures published by the charity Education Support revealed that more than a third of those working in education in Scotland have experienced mental health issues in the past 12 months, and that more than half have considered leaving the sector due to pressures on their health and well-being over the past 2 years. First Minister, after more than 12 years in office, Scotland's schools have faced plummeting investment and a recruitment and workload crisis. The health of our teachers is being harmed, but our children's education and life chances are being harmed too. So what does the Scottish Government intend to do to change this?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, we value our teachers. We value the contribution our teachers make to the education of our young people day in and day out. Investment in education is rising in Scotland, and rightly so. We have also given teachers the best paid deal of any of the UK countries. As part of that pay deal, we've also taken steps and additional measures that are aimed at addressing issues relating to workload, well-being and teacher empowerment. So we're taking the action designed to make sure our teachers have the support they need to deliver what they are required to deliver for our pupils. And of course, when it comes to attainment in our schools, all of the evidence, and much of this evidence is cited in these exchanges on a regular basis, shows that attainment is rising. I had an exchange with Jackson Carlaw about this last week, and there is a blog published in the last couple of days by the Professor of Education at Stirling University, who himself, somebody I should say that is not without criticisms of curriculum for excellence, but himself says that the evidence says that at National 5s and at Highers, attainment is rising. So the narrative that the Tories, aided and abetted as usual by Labour, want to put across about Scottish education simply is not borne out by the facts.
Sorry, Richard Leonard.
Well, there are 3,000 fewer teachers now than when the SNP took office. And it's not just teachers. It's not just teachers who are considering leaving their profession. Today, Unison Scotland launched a new report based on a survey conducted of social work teams in Scottish local authorities. It reports that 90% of staff are considering walking out of their jobs in social work. And is it any wonder? Here is just one social worker's experience, and I quote, "We are under pressure to hit savings targets. Many staff are stressed to the point of their own health being compromised, resulting in higher risk of poor care. Time spent with vulnerable adults is too short, so many are lonely and depressed. Many staff work extra hours without pay just to get jobs done. Unison told the BBC this morning that the service is at breaking point. So what does the Scottish Government intend to do to change this?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, to finish off on teachers, there are 1,200 more teachers in our schools than there were when I became First Minister. We're putting more money into education, and we're rewarding our teachers for the job that they do. In terms of social workers, and I welcome the Unison report, it is always important that we study evidence like this carefully, but we've seen a 5.4% increase in the numbers of practising social workers since 2008. The workforce has increased, and as the latest official statistics for the social services workforce show at the end of 2017, which is the latest figures we've got, it was the largest it has been since 2008. We've provided over £25 million to support the training of social workers over the past 5 years. We're investing heavily in mental health support services. And I would say to Richard Leonard, we are doing all of this, and we have been doing all of this in the face of continued Tory austerity, which begs the question again, why, if Richard Leonard is, as I believe he is, concerned about the impacts of austerity, why he wants to keep Scotland's futures in the hands of Tory governments at Westminster, rather than allow Scotland to take more of these decisions ourselves.
Richard Leonard.
Well, to state the obvious, I don't want to see the future in the hands of the Tories. I want to see the future in the hands of a Labour government. And I just hope that the First Minister listens to the first-hand, real-life experiences of these people who are delivering these services. These are voices that deserve to be listened to. 2 weeks ago, I raised with the First Minister the growing crisis of mental health, stress and anxiety amongst NHS workers. And today, the human cost to Scotland's education workers and social work teams is also plain to see. So isn't it clear that these working people and the people who depend on the critical services that they provide are being let down because of decisions that this government has taken? Scotland's public services desperately need investment. Investment that you, First Minister, have failed to deliver, but a Labour government will. But last night, you threatened to bring down a Labour government. So, First Minister, why don't you admit that what Scotland needs is a decade of investment under Labour, not the decade of cuts prescribed in your blueprint for an independent Scotland?
First Minister.
My goodness, you can always tell when Scottish Labour is desperate when they take themselves right back to 1979. The fact of the matter is, I'll never put the Tories or support the Tories in power, unlike Labour, who actually prefer Tory government at Westminster than self-government for Scotland. Something that is utterly inexplicable. And on the question of teachers, of NHS workers, of social workers, we take very seriously the stresses and strains that all of these public service workers operate under. They do a fantastic job and they deserve our support, but that is why we are taking the action we are, increasing the number of teachers, increasing their pay, putting more money into education, increasing the number of social workers and increasing the number of people working in our NHS with record funding to our National Health Service. So these are the actions we will continue to take, supporting public service workers right across the country instead of the empty rhetoric we get day after day from Labour.
Thank you. We've got quite a number of constituency questions today. The first from Edward Mountain, to be followed by Anas Sarwar. Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week I asked the First Minister about the poor financial management of NHS Highland. In the past, I've asked her about the appalling bullying in NHS Highland. This time I rise to ask about the 78-week delay for orthopaedic operations in NHS Highland, with only 54% of patients getting operations within the treatment time guarantee. First Minister, what have you asked the Cabinet Secretary to do to resolve these serious issues?
First Minister.
Well, I would hope Edward Mountain would be very familiar with the actions the Health Secretary is taking in terms of the allegations around bullying, the Sturrock report that looked at these issues in NHS Highland. We work closely with NHS Highland and indeed other boards in terms of their financial management, and we're putting record funding into the health service, and there is an £850 million waiting times initiative targeting waits that are too long in the NHS. And of course, the most recent Audit Scotland report, while it had many important things to say, also recognised that in the face of rising demand, performance was improving against most of these waiting times targets.
Anas Sarwar to be followed by Christine Graham.
Presiding Officer, something is seriously wrong at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital campus. Since its opening, there have been a series of scandals, but this one has broken me. I have had information shared with me which shows senior managers have been repeatedly alerted to the fact that a previous review failed to include cases of infection related to the water supply in 2017. Central to this whistleblowing evidence is that there were 26 infections at the Children's Cancer Ward, and in one case, a child died as a result. To this day, the parents have never been told. This isn't just a scandal, it's a heartbreaking human tragedy. First Minister, Cabinet Secretary, you aren't being told the truth. I implore you, for the sake of the staff who have been put in this unforgivable situation, for the sake of all the patients who use this hospital, for the sake of public trust in our institutions, but most of all, for the sake of those parents, particularly of the child that has lost their life, will you please personally intervene to seek answers, to get justice for the families, and to take the necessary actions so this never happens again?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, the Health Secretary is personally involved in all of these issues and regularly keeps me appraised of developments. I, firstly, can't even begin to imagine the pain for families that have lost loved ones, and it is because of that that we are absolutely determined that these matters are fully investigated. The Government has been working closely with the Health Board and staff on the issue of infections in recent months, and that work will continue to ensure that the Health Board is doing all it needs to do to maintain a safe environment for patients. Patient safety is paramount, and that is exactly why the Health Secretary commissioned an independent review to look at the design, build, commissioning and maintenance of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, and of course also why on the 18th of September a public inquiry into these issues that have arisen at that hospital and indeed the sick kids in Edinburgh was announced. We are determined to address the concern of patients and families, and the Health Secretary of course has committed to returning to Parliament to set out the full details of the public inquiry as soon as possible.
Christine Graham to be followed by Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, I have been contacted by distressed and angry constituents who have partners with dementia and advanced dementia, who found themselves with no suitable care packages in place when Scottish Borders Council closed its day centres, with assessments only being done after the closures. Is there a role here for the Scottish Government, or is it just to be left to the vagaries of the Scottish Borders Council? First Minister.
Well, obviously there are responsibilities of the Council here and indeed integrated health and social care partnerships, but I would be very happy to ask the Health Secretary to look into the particular circumstances of this because it is of course the case and rightly so that the Government takes a very close interest in how patients are being dealt with, how delayed discharges are being tackled to ensure that patients are getting the care that they need in the place and in the setting that is most appropriate for their needs.
Alexander Stewart to be followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Figures have shown a 63% increase in the number of aggressive confrontations reported by Fife Education staff last year. Clearly, any violence in the workplace should not be tolerated, and the level of violence and aggression towards teaching staff is clearly unacceptable. The EIS has recommended additional training for teaching staff on how to deal with aggressive situations. What action will the First Minister take to ensure that?
First Minister.
Well, any violence in any workplace, obviously including schools, is completely unacceptable, and that should be the very clear message that comes from all of us. The Education Secretary works closely, liaises closely with the EIS, and will take any suggestion that the EIS makes around training very seriously, and I'm sure the Education Secretary would be happy to update the member on this particular issue.
Rhoda Grant to be followed by Keith Brown.
The First Minister will be aware of the chaos that has been caused in the Western and Argyll Islands due to the breakdown of the Loch Seaforth and inadequate ferry provision. This has been exacerbated by boats being moved onto routes that are not suitable, meaning that they cannot sail in poor weather. Earlier this week, 25 out of the 28 services were affected. Will she now listen to islanders and ensure that there are enough boats suitable to provide these lifeline services?
First Minister.
Well, we monitored the performance of all of the Lifeline ferry operators very closely. Service disruption on Monday the 11th of November was mainly due to poor weather conditions, and of course the decision to delay or cancel a sailing is never taken lightly by any operator. We are investing and have been investing heavily in ferry services. Despite the reductions in our budget, the Scottish Government has invested over £2 billion in the Clyde and Hebrides services, the Northern Isles ferry services and ferry infrastructure since 2007, and we will continue to do so to make sure that our island communities have the lifeline services that they require.
And Keith Brown.
The First Minister will be aware that the latest 4-month average waiting time figures for A&E across Scotland, including Forth Valley Health Board, is over 90%, which shows obviously the pressures on the NHS and the achievements of NHS staff. But is she also aware of the figures released today, this morning, that show in England an average of 83%, the lowest recorded figure on record? And does she believe, as I do, that this shows there is one government in the UK committed to doing the day job, and it's not this incompetent Tory UK government?
Briefly, First Minister.
I'm not sure, well I am sure actually why the Tories are getting a bit edgy about this question. These are serious matters. Our A&E services are under pressure and those who work in them do a fantastic job. Our A&E services have performed better than those in other parts of the UK now for 4.5 years, and that is to the credit of everybody who works in our NHS. I think the figures published in England today, of course, are a matter of concern. There are great pressures on the NHS in England, as is the case here in Scotland. But Conservatives and Labour get a bit upset when we compare the performance of the Scottish NHS to that in England and Wales. But of course, the reason we do that is because both of them claim that if they were in government in Scotland, the NHS would be performing better. So it's reasonable to look at where the Tories are in government in England and the NHS is doing worse, and where Labour is in government in Wales, where the NHS is also doing worse. Scottish NHS is the best performing, certainly in accident and emergency, in the whole of the UK. I know Labour and the Tories don't like it, but patients across Scotland certainly do.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
I hope the whole chamber will share my horror at the Court of Session ruling yesterday that Serco's despicable policy of lock-change eviction of asylum seekers is lawful. If it is lawful, we must certainly still say that it isn't right. It effectively strips people of their human rights and puts them at immediate risk of street homelessness. That includes people like Mohammed and Khadija, a married couple in their 70s with severe health problems, who are among those facing being turfed out into the streets in the middle of winter. Greens believe that we must treat all those who arrive on our shores seeking refuge with dignity and compassion, and I think most people in Scotland share that view. The Scottish Government's statement said, "We will consider the implications of the judgment," but this is urgent. Can the First Minister tell us what immediate actions the Scottish Government will take in response to this humanitarian crisis?
First Minister.
Well, we'll liaise closely with Glasgow City Council. I agree with Patrick Harvey. I am horrified at the implications of this judgment. If lock change evictions are legal, and of course the Human Rights Act is reserved to Westminster, but if they are legal, they certainly are not moral. And that is the key issue. But let's be clear about this. We've ended up in this situation because of an inhumane and degrading UK government asylum system, which is leaving people destitute and homeless in the country where they have sought refuge. And we should be giving refuge to people who are fleeing some of the worst circumstances that any of us can imagine. So first and foremost, we need a long-term sustainable solution to asylum so that we have a humane system in place. In the meantime, the Scottish Government will do everything we can within our powers to ensure that we're providing the care and help that asylum seekers need, and the Community Secretary will be liaising closely closely with stakeholders to see how we can best support people who have been placed in this situation by an inhumane asylum system. Longer term, and I hope it's not too long term, what we really need is control over immigration and asylum here in this Parliament, so we can build from scratch, as we're doing right now with social security, a system that has humanity, respect and dignity at its very heart.
Patrick Harvey.
Well, I agree that it's the UK government's inhumane and degrading hostile environment that's at the root of this tragedy. They're using destitution as a deliberate policy tool, and it's morally indefensible. But what people need in the here and now is not that long-term solution. We should be striving for it, but what people need in the here and now is somewhere to stay. We can't simply accept what the UK government is doing to people, and the Scottish government can and must respond. In November last year, I asked questions about this situation because we knew this crisis was coming. And the First Minister told me that the Scottish Government would take the action that is necessary to prevent a humanitarian crisis. But adequate emergency accommodation is still not in place. And we know that at least 150 people face imminent eviction and homelessness in the winter months ahead. We know who's to blame for the brutality of UK asylum policy, but what these people need is not someone to blame. What they need is shelter, food, warmth, healthcare and support. This is an urgent crisis, and we have a demand for a rapid humanitarian response to ensure that these basic needs are met. When will the First Minister be able to confirm that arrangements are in place, including emergency accommodation for all those who need it now?
First Minister.
Can I say to Patrick Harvey, in all sincerity, this is not simply about trying to apportion blame. This is about being clear where, firstly, responsibility and secondly, legal powers lie. The Scottish Government, and I think our record speaks for itself on this, we will do everything we possibly can to shield people, asylum seekers, those who have been subjected to welfare cuts, from the implications of policies that we consider are inhumane and that we deeply disagree with. And Aileen Campbell will be happy to liaise with Patrick Harvey about what is possible in a practical sense, working with Glasgow City Council. We will leave no stone unturned within the legal powers that we have. But I don't, and Patrick Harvey doesn't either, do anybody any favours if we are not clear about what the root of this problem is, because otherwise we will not be providing the real solutions that people need. So short term, we'll do everything we can. He has my absolute assurance on that. But if we are to solve this problem, we need to get the powers over this out of the hands of a Tory government that is leading to this kind of thing and into the hands of a parliament that will build a system that doesn't have these inhumane consequences built into it right from the start.
Question number 4, Willie Rennie.
The police staff survey helps us understand the welfare of people across the force. But it is now 3 years late. The delay is making people suspicious that it's going to be bad news for the police. The last survey showed that only tiny numbers believed that the force cared about their welfare. So we have investigated it ourselves. We found that the number of working days lost to mental ill health has gone up 11% in just 2 years for police officers. For police staff, it's 25%. So what do these shocking numbers say about the state of our police 6 years after centralisation?
First Minister.
Well, in terms of the staff survey, I'll be happy to write to Willie Rennie about details about when exactly that will be happening. But overall, our police, like our NHS workers, like social workers, like teachers in our schools, clearly do jobs that are incredibly stressful. Police have been are receiving training to deliver brief distress interventions to others. But the welfare of police is very important. That is exactly why we have maintained police numbers at the level well above that level that we inherited when we came into office, in contrast to what has happened elsewhere. It is also why we are ensuring that our police officers are properly rewarded for the job that they do, again through a pay increase that is much greater than elsewhere. And we will continue to work closely with the police service to make sure that they are equipped. We are protecting the revenue budget in real terms of the police service over this Parliament. So we will do all of these things to make sure that our police officers, like our other public sector workers, have the support that they deserve from their government.
Willie Rennie.
I'm afraid that's cold comfort for the staff off sick. Yeah. The Chief Superintendent in charge of policing in Tayside said that mental health was a huge amount of their demand. The Scottish Government promised new mental health staff working alongside the police to help them cope. In the last week, we have discovered that this adds up to a miserable 7.5 extra staff. People will be lucky if they've even seen them in the canteen, let alone worked with them. We have police off sick, massive demands on their time, just 7.5 extra staff to help them. It's just not good enough. Will the First Minister take off time from pontificating about other parties and her referendum and take practical action to increase mental health support for our police?
First Minister.
Well, given this is a serious matter, I'll resist the temptation to reflect on Willie Rennie and pontification, but anyway, moving on. Look, these are important issues, and that is why we are investing in our police service. We are investing in mental health support workers across a range of different settings. We've made a commitment to do that over this Parliament, and we are delivering that commitment over this Parliament. We have a higher number of police officers than was the case when we came into government, and we're maintaining it well above that level. We're investing in policing resources. We're making sure our police service is rewarded, and we are also investing heavily in improving mental health services. One of the factors we talk about in the general population, but it is also reflected in each of these public services, is that people are more able now to come forward and seek help if they are suffering mental health difficulties. That is a good thing, but it means we must continue to make the investment and improve the services available, and we are very focused every single day on doing exactly that.
Some further supplementary questions. The first from James Kelly, to be followed by Claire Adamson. James Kelly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I draw the First Minister's attention to reports in the Sunday Post that rape victims whose mobile phones had been retained by Police Scotland for investigation purposes were still being charged by mobile phone companies? It is indeed scandalous that women who are enduring such a vulnerable experience are treated in such a hard-hearted manner. It's rightly been criticised, the mobile phone companies have rightly been criticised by Rape Crisis Scotland for profiteering from people who are enduring a traumatic experience. Can I ask the First Minister to agree with me that mobile phone companies should immediately cease charging rape victims in such circumstances, and also to ensure that Police Scotland review and update their procedures to properly support rape victims in such situations?
First Minister.
Well, I do think this is an important issue, and I certainly share the concerns of Rape Crisis Scotland about this. If I can deal with the police and mobile phone companies separately, though I know these issues are connected. Investigation of crime, of any crime, is a matter for the police, but I am very clear, and senior officers have been very clear, that a rape victim's phone should only be withheld for as long as it is required for an evidential reason. Secondly, on mobile phone companies, I do think it is unacceptable that mobile phone companies are continuing to charge people whose phones are being withheld in this way, and I would expect companies to respond sympathetically and with care to individuals who might have experienced the trauma of rape or sexual assault and have had their phones taken as evidence. It's not acceptable that they continue to be billed for a phone that they are not in possession of and able to use. So we will continue to do what we can, obviously working with the police, respecting, of course, the operational independence of the police in investigating crime, but also with mobile phone companies. And I'd be happy to ask the Justice Secretary to update the member later once we've had the opportunity to take these issues forward.
Claire Adamson, to be followed by Liam Kerr. Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister share my concern and disgust? The analysis of 5 years' worth of data shows that 1 in 2 ill or disabled people who appealed against their rights being denied to employment support allowance and disability benefits are successful at appeal. First Minister, this system is morally bankrupt and broken. Is it time that the Tory government started listening to the calls made for many years from this place and to the concerns of the UN rapporteur that people in our society who are ill and disabled need to be treated with dignity and respect.
First Minister.
I think Claire Adamson is right to raise this issue. The number of appeals that are being upheld, and we see that from the data, I think does strongly suggest that the system is fundamentally broken and that it is working against the very people that it should be there to assist. And that is the exact opposite of the approach we're seeking to take with Scotland's social security system. People have repeatedly told the UK government that their welfare system causes stress and anxiety. And while employment and support allowance will remain reserved, and I would urge the UK government to listen carefully and to pay close attention to this evidence, it is the case that we in the Scottish Government will start delivering disability benefits from next year. We've already committed to a number of improvements, including significantly reducing face-to-face assessments, and when they are necessary, providing a flexible service that works better for the people relying on these benefits. And in addition, from the beginning of the application process, there will be a focus on gathering the right information to ensure that good decisions are taken from the start, so that we don't then see the high number of appeals being overturned that is sadly the hallmark of the current DWP system. So finally, Presiding Officer, I would urge the UK Government to pay close attention to this data and to take the action, perhaps learning from the approach we're taking here in Scotland, to put this right, and like the immigration system, like other aspects of the welfare system, to start to put some dignity and humanity and respect at its heart.
Liam Kerr, to be followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, the First Minister rightly apologised to Tom Mason after misleading Parliament. Now, earlier this week, the SNP government boasted that youth unemployment had fallen, only for a leading economist from the Fraser-Vallender Institute to point out the figures were misleading. Will the First Minister take this opportunity to offer an apology for these further misleading statements?
First Minister.
No, the stats that were published earlier this week and were referred to were stats that were published. They were the most up-to-date stats, the labour market study. There are, of course, other stats that we also look at as well. I don't particularly want to get into what other people tweet, but the Economist in particular himself has tweeted the labour market stats around youth employment in past years. So obviously, all of us, particularly government ministers, given the rules around official statistics, have to be very careful about how we use statistics, and the Scottish Government will always reflect on any comments or criticisms that are made. But these were figures that were published earlier this week, and the tweet referred to simply quoted the published statistics, which were also official statistics.
Willie Coffey.
Thank you. Can I ask the First Minister if she can provide an update on progress with the Ayrshire growth deal, which the Scottish Government is contributing £100 million towards?
First Minister.
Well, since we announced our £103 million commitment to the Ayrshire Growth Deal in March, the Scottish Government and our enterprise and skills agencies have worked with Ayrshire partners to help them develop the business cases that are necessary for us to agree a final deal in partnership with the UK Government. We will continue to match the ambition of our Ayrshire partners, aiming to agree a final deal as soon as possible. As part of the Ayrshire Growth Deal programme, we have already approved the business case for Kilmarnock's Halo project, which I know is in Willie Coffey's constituency, and I'm very pleased to note that work on that project has commenced, offering the prospect of hundreds of local jobs and a boost for businesses in the town.
Question number 5, Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to promote equal pay among men and women.
First Minister.
In March this year, we launched a Gender Pay Gap Action Plan, which was the first of its kind in the UK. It has over 50 actions to tackle the root causes of the gender pay gap. A refreshed Scottish Business Pledge has as one of its 3 core elements to take action to address the gender pay gap. And this year we're providing £800,000 to 22 projects under the Workplace Equality Fund, more than £200,000 to close the gap, and £159,000 to Family Friendly Working Scotland Partnership, all of which will help make workplaces fairer and more flexible. It is incumbent on us to tackle this further, indeed to eradicate the gender pay gap, which is outrageous in this day and age. And of course we would be helped in doing that if all employment powers lay in the hands of this Scottish Parliament.
Gillian Martin.
Thank the First Minister for that answer. Today is Equal Pay Day, the day in the year when, based on data, women stop earning relative to men. To mark it, the Fawcett Society has launched a campaign to equip women with a legally enforceable right to know the basic pay information they need to work out whether they are being discriminated against. As we approach the 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act, does the First Minister welcome this campaign and agree that women should not still be waiting for equal pay for equal work?
First Minister.
I do agree with that. This, of course, is Equal Pay Day, and it is shameful that what this day says occurs at this point in the year. The Equal Pay Act, and I hesitate to say this given Gillian Martin has just said it's approaching its 50th anniversary, but the Equal Pay Act was passed in the year I was born. And it is outrageous that almost 50 years on, we still don't have equal pay in this country. So it is positive that the median gender pay gap has reduced by more than half over the 20 years of the life of this Parliament. It's at 7% in Scotland, which is lower than the UK level, but there should be no gender pay gap at all. We cannot and will not have true gender equality as long as women are being paid less than men for the same work. So it's incumbent on all of us, whether employers or government, to tackle this deep unfairness. A clear action that can be taken is to improve transparency in reporting regulations, and we've called on the Scottish Government, the UK Government rather, to do that because powers lie there. But we will continue to take action within our sphere of responsibility to end this scourge once and for all.
And Brian Whittle. Sorry, question 6, Brian Whittle.
Thank you. No. Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to reduce levels of diabetes, heart disease and stroke among the over 65s.
First Minister.
We continue to implement the Diabetes, Heart Disease and Stroke Improvement Plans, which set out our priorities and actions to deliver improved prevention, treatment and care. These plans are making a difference. Between 2008 and 2018, the mortality rate for coronary heart disease decreased by 37.2% and for stroke decreased by 42.7%. We're also leading the way in the UK with innovative public health policies. Our Diet and Healthy Weight Delivery Plan strives to make a significant impact on the prevention and remission of type 2 diabetes, and our Tobacco Action Plan is delivering results as the smoking rate for adults has continued to fall. These policies strive to help people make healthier choices and support them to live healthier lives.
Brian Whittle.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. I wonder if she's aware of a recent report that is asking for gastric band surgery to be available on the NHS for over 65s to address obesity-related diabetes, heart attacks and strokes. I wonder if the First Minister would agree with me that a better use of this resource would be to encourage and promote activities that help physical and mental well-being, such as walking football and walking netball and other such activities. And this should be the first step to tackling obesity long before any promoting such invasive surgery.
First Minister.
Well, can I say first of all to Brian Whittle, well, I thank him for raising these issues. Bariatric surgery, as it's called, as he will be aware, is available on the NHS, but it will be a clinical decision as to whether it is appropriate for a particular patient. And if it is clinically appropriate for a patient, it should be provided on the NHS. So I agree with that. But secondly, I also agree that prevention is the key here, and it's what we should be principally focused on, which is why the public health work that I spoke about is so important, as well as ensuring early diagnosis of illness and good care and treatment. So the strategy that I already mentioned is focused on all of these things, and as we continue to take these actions, I very much hope we will continue to see the reduced mortality rate for heart disease and for stroke.
Maureen Watt.
The First Minister will be aware that the Home Secretary Priti Patel has pledged the Tories will cut overall immigration and end freedom of movement if Boris Johnson wins this election.
Sorry to stop you. I thought you were pressing for a supplementary on this question. I'm afraid the questions have to, the supplementaries have to follow the question, and it's on diabetes.
I thought since time was available.
I'm afraid this one's on diabetes and healthcare. David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be well aware that today is World Diabetes Day. Does the First Minister share Diabetes Scotland's view that all people living with diabetes should receive appropriate emotional, psychological and mental health support they need to self-manage their condition, as people with diabetes are twice as likely to experience depression?
Minister.
Yes, I do agree with that, and the Scottish Government will continue to work to achieve that aim. I would pay tribute to David Stewart. I know he's taken a long-standing interest in issues associated with diabetes. He did that while I was Health Secretary, and he will know as a result of that the work that the Scottish Government is doing to make sure that we reduce the incidence of diabetes, as I say, maximise reversal of type 2 diabetes, but also make sure the right support and services are there for people who are living with diabetes.
Thank you very much, and that concludes First Minister's questions. We're going to move on shortly to a members' business debate in the name of Ruth Maguire on the day of the imprisoned writer, but we're just going to have a short suspension to allow some visitors to come into the gallery and for members to change seats. A short suspension.